Well, it's another very warm welcome back, all my loyal YouTube subscribers, and thanks once again for returning to look at more vintage racers from back in the day here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, next up we're going to take a look around another British manufactured classic, which without doubt did achieve legendary status in the off-road world during the 1970s and is still regarded as among one of the best of British motocross names from that period. So without any further delay, let's check out Rob Hughes' fully restored 1978 580 2-valve CCM. Now, this 1978 580 is a bike that Rob restored a few years back, and for me personally, I always like to think that these 78 machines were among some of the nicer CCMs that came out of the Alan Clews Bolton factory. Although this particular bike is a restored machine, it still has many of the proper parts still fitted from 1978. Although in terms of parts availability for these classic CCMs, there's not really any issues in that department, as there are many companies out there these days making replacement parts for these British bikes, which makes them an excellent machine for a restoration. But mind you, finding an original to actually restore is a completely different matter. But Rob's bike here has had the full treatment and looks absolutely stunning with its new chrome plated chassis and of course that beautiful BSA derived 580cc 4-stroke motor. But for 1978 these were a common sight around the motocross racetracks of the UK and occasionally even in Europe. And with the likes of the great Bob Wright and John Banks in the saddle of these machines, these were certainly a tour de force and could take on the very best of whatever the Japanese had to offer at the time. Naturally, the heart of these 4-stroke CCMs was this BSA B50 engine, which the late Alan Clews re-engineered after he bought over the failed BSA competition department in the early 1970s. Now, Alan took what was essentially an old BSA road bike engine and then tuned it for more performance, and after Alan worked his magic on this power plant, it turned into a sure fire race winner. The engine was a single cylinder 2-valve 4-stroke with a 3-speed gearbox fitted as standard. Now, 3 gears was more than adequate for these bikes, because in reality you only needed 2 gears on this bike, one to get you off the line and another for pulling you around the track, because the tractor-like power that you got from these big motors just seemed to go on forever. Now, a big bore exhaust of course on these CCMs, no tailpipe or silencer fitted, probably to try and keep the weight down, and anyhow you wouldn't want to spoil the fantastic grille that comes from that lovely BSA engine. But this beautifully sculptured engine sitting in this CCM chassis just looked absolutely perfect for a 4-stroke motocross racer. Now, it's pretty fair to say that these big CCM engines liked a drink or two, and when these engines were performing at the top of their game, the fuel could flow through this carburetor like the proverbial waterfall. Now, another interesting fact was that these 78s were also renowned for having their footrests bolted onto the engine casings rather than the conventional method of fixing them to the bike's chassis. But nevertheless, this system all worked very well and was quite radical for its day. Now, these 78s used magnesium top and bottom triple clamps along with magnesium on the engine casings and the front and rear brake hubs. Now, as I recall, the bottom section of the fork stanchions were also made from magnesium, and it's still good to see that Rob's bike still has its red fork seal protectors that these bikes had back in the day. Now, as I mentioned, these front and rear brake hubs and the brake back plates were also made from this weight saving magnesium material. Now, this bike's seat cover and its plastics are more than likely reproduction parts, although having said that, Rob has a stadium sticker on the rear mudder, which these would have been fitted with in their heyday, but then again it could just be a pattern part, as the original stadium plastics are now almost non-existent these days. With regards the rear shocks on Rob's 78, I'm not really sure if these are period correct, as these would have been a pair of remote girdlings back in 1978, but then again these parts are virtually impossible to find these days, so it's no surprise really that Rob's fixed a more uprated rear suspension to this restored bike. Now, I'm almost sure that the wheels aren't the originals, and Rob's bike has a pair of good quality gold alloy Acront rims on the front and rear of this particular CCM. It also looks like it still has its proper CCM magnesium hubs fitted, which again is quite rare on one of these more modern CCMs. Now, these black coloured alloy fuel tanks were a trademark of these 78 bikes and held just about enough fuel for even the longest of moto races, but this particular example, as you'd expect, has been totally refurbished and repainted with the new CCM graphics added, which look absolutely great against that black background. Now, this seat cover again is almost certainly a remanufactured replacement, which more than likely came from MXM Graphics, who supply these particular parts for these classic Clews machines. And these foam filled seats were a very decent place to lay your backside on for a machine from the late 1970s, although of course if you were one of those riders who did your riding standing up on the pegs all the time, then you've probably never even thought about it for a single minute. Now, just like the seat covers, these CCM side panels are all reproduced and are easily available to purchase from retailers around the UK. Now, Cumbria Classic Mouldings are just one of these companies who supply these CCM plastic items. Now, another part associated with these 1978 bikes is this moulded plastic number plate, which again can be found easily if you're in the middle of a CCM restoration. But of course, in 1978, these particular parts would have had the word Castrol moulded into this top section, who are of course a major sponsor to CCM back in the day, although I expect that there's some kind of copyright issue with this new reproduction part that can't use the Castrol logo. But this particular restoration on Rob's 1978 bike is a first class job, and not only do these old strokers sound superb through these big bore pipes, they certainly look great as well, and there's just something about these old BSA motors slotted into these Clews chassis that make these unlike any other bike of its day. So overall, it's another good restoration of another great Alan Clews CCM machine. It's good to know that there are owners and riders out there who are continuing to preserve the CCM name and the legacy of these iconic bikes started by Alan Clews all those years ago. So don't forget, if these are the kind of off-road classic motorcycles that you like looking at here on YouTube, then I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel to see more of these type of back in the day motorcycles. Now, coming up on my next video, we'll be taking a quick look at this very nice looking 250 CZ. So until then, thanks again for watching, and thanks for taking the time to tune in to Classic Dirt Bike TV.